So the first part to make me cry in your book, and there were many, was the anecdote from the women's circle that you attended in London. And in particular, the story from a recent divorcee who had been in a long abusive marriage with a manipulative, coercive man. And she had walked away from it. And I've got personal experience with that kind of relationship. And so to read about somebody who had been through that for so much longer than I had, and had found the strength to walk away, it was actually quite mind-blowing and really, really inspiring to read, because the reality of that kind of relationship is it deprives you of every shred of self-confidence and self-trust. It robs you from the ability to see the world in any kind of objective way. And I don't think people who haven't been through it aren't really going to understand how profound that is. I was only in this relationship, I was in for less than a year, but I was a shell of the person I was at the beginning by the end. And I credit my family with me being able to get out of that. They were the only people who could jog me back into the realization that there was more to me and more to life and more to other people. So to read that story from a woman, I just thought it was so important. And I wanted to hear a little bit from you about the experience of that women's circle in general, and in particular, that story.
Thank you. Yeah, it was like I get my hair's on end when you talk about it, and it was a moment, I think, for everyone in that room, we were like, oh my goodness, like you say, the courage. So Regina Tomaschel, this follows on from Pussy, that she writes a lot about the importance of sisterhood, which again is a phrase I would have rolled my eyes at. The importance of gathering women together, the importance of being really honest about our pains and our struggles and our hopes. And she talks about often when women come together, we can go into this sort of self-deprecating, like faux version of ourselves that, we're neither raising each other up nor addressing the real pain in us. We make these kind of jokes about, being tired and old and whatever we do, and that's our way of bonding, and she thinks it's so limiting. That actually when women come together and really grieve our pain and do that together and be seen, do that in front of people, because again, I think a lot of us, we try and keep our messy bits out of view, and especially when there's real traumas, that's quite often something we're keeping to ourselves. So she talks about coming together to express this real pain sometimes that can be with being a woman, in our personal histories and our collective histories, but then also going through that into the celebration of being a woman. And again, it's funny, I get kind of shivers when I talk about it, because I think it's something that's so important. And again, I hadn't realised it, and I went to an all-girls school, I was one of 3 daughters. I was fed up of female spaces. I didn't take much from them. I felt safe in them in a way, but there was also kind of sometimes the bitchiness and competitiveness as being in an all-female environment. And so I had never, as an adult, then sought out female-only spaces. And I went to this women's circle in London after reading Pussy and realising how I actually had quite misogynist views about myself as a woman. And then I realised, I was also holding those about other women. I didn't value us very much. I just took us for granted. I took myself for granted. And so I went to this women's circle, which it turns out there's actually women's circles happening all over the world, all over the city. For women to gather in a circle in particular is something that has happened from, ancient times. And I was very uncomfortable walking into that room. I was really, I thought it was silly and girly. And I noticed then that I was quite judgy of other women, and I was comparing myself. I was comparing myself to people I thought were prettier than me, or I was making all sorts of judgmental stories about people. And then we sit in this circle, and the truth of, people were really brave, given that you don't know people in this room. People opened up, and at each point, when you hear the truth of someone's experience, like all your judgments just fall away. You're just seeing the truth of someone. And when this woman started speaking, I mean, you could hear a pin drop. She had been in this abusive, controlling marriage. She had 2 kids with him, and I haven't got to experience this kind of relationships, but it sounded like it was so drip by drip by drip. She didn't quite realise how bad it had gotten, and he, again, she didn't realise this, but he had one way or another isolated her from her friends and her family, so she was so in his orbit. But one friend, somebody, sent her a link to a video on YouTube about coercive control, and she watched it.
Hero.
And she said she couldn't unsee it in that moment. Again, I get shivers. She said she couldn't unsee it, and she suddenly realised what her kids had been brought up with, and what she had been experiencing. And she said after that moment, I couldn't stay or my soul would have died. And that's such, you know, that phrase, my soul would have died. And it turned out he'd been bugging them, he'd been monitoring their travel. You know, the scale of it was actually, it turned out so much bigger than she'd understood. And she found her way out of that situation, and the courage and the practicalities of it. But she just said once she knew, and she couldn't have her children in it anymore. And then, you know, in this circle, then you're meant to just listen to each other and not give feedback. But in that moment, there was obviously another woman who I think had been through something similar. And she was like, this is why we need to come together. This is why women need to come together, because we need to be speaking the truth and to have someone say that is not okay. And if you see, like right now, the Taliban in Afghanistan are talking about not letting women talk to each other. You know, there's,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, this is it. It's part of their regime, and because that is how threatening it is to abusive situations to have women talking to each other, it all unravels, and that's why it's so important. And if you go back to like the consciousness raising workshops of the 60s, which were women coming together, again, it was the first time that women were just talking, not just, but they were talking about their lives and realizing, oh, this isn't right, and it's not just me. This is a big situation, and the solidarity and the strength that can come from being supported by other people is actually game changing. Yeah. Which is why it can be threatening for the people like the Taliban and also, yeah, and I guess also maybe relationships. You know, I wonder sometimes if that kind of the power of women when we come together, I think, can be quite threatening to men and abusive men. Because,
well, I mean, men coming together can be threatening.
Yeah.
To women.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because we live in this weird. Well, it's because we live in a patriarchal society, and there were certain rules and hierarchies that we're expected to fit into.
Yeah, exactly.
And it threatens women coming together. Threatens those systems.
Yeah.
Because they thrive off and are based on our silence and invisibility.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really powerful. I mean, it feels, there's been, have you noticed this huge sort of resurgence of witch stuff that's been going on lately, which I'm really into.
Me too. Me too.
And not in a kind of necessarily in a sort of spell casting magic way, although not in that way either.
Exactly, me too.
But I mean, I'm qualifying it for anyone who hasn't sort of engaged in it. It's not about spell casting. It's about something much more primal.
Yeah.
And it's linking in with, you know, before we started recording this, and you and I were talking about our bodies and our bodily reaction to illness, and also, you know, our connection to intuition and how that shows up.
Yeah.
And all of that discussion comes out of this this voice that's been given to the female collective that hasn't been around. I'm so here for it.
Yeah.
I just find it really inspiring and really hopeful.
Yeah. We can talk ourselves out of our own experiences and our own reactions, and the more that we can be in situations where we are encouraged to speak the truth and not try and justify it or explain it away. Because I could see that in myself always, you know, if there's any time I felt angry, she'd say, oh, but I shouldn't feel angry because actually it was my fault, because always trying to talk myself out of reactions that were anything other than pleasing and nice.
Yeah.
And these sorts of spaces where actually those rules aren't there. When you go to like a women's circle, your job isn't to be pleasing and nice. And you might find in the early stages you're so ingrained in doing that you still do that, but actually that's not what you're there for. Your job is to be honest and open to the other women.
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, it feels so good. It really feels so good to be honest and have the acceptance of other women. And then you start to find your voice, because then you're like, oh God, I didn't know I felt that way.
Yeah.
And there's something about being in a room with other people that are listening with total kindness and not giving advice or anything like that, but just there to listen, that I found myself saying things that I didn't even know I thought or felt.
Yes.
But I guess that's why, you know, like with a good therapist, that's safety and just attention, and then we get to know ourselves.
I had imaginary conversations with you while reading the book.
Yeah.
That shocked me. Your book does something similar to the Women's Circle. Of course, we are reading it, ostensibly at least, on our own. But you don't feel on your own when you're reading a book like that. You know, it's so nice to take a break from the didacticism that we're used to in the kind of self-help space.
Yeah.
And you know, your books read like novels or memoirs.
Yeah.
And they are memoirs.
Yeah.
But they read like novels because they are a period of time and you follow your journey.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mum.
Yeah.
And that, I just think, I mean, obviously this is why we've created Betwixt the way it is. I mean, story carries a whole different level of potency when it comes to actually integrating information. And your books are doing the same thing, because you're in that story with you.
Yeah.
And it does feel like, I mean, I'd forgotten that. I mean, I will have to have some of those conversations with you. I've forgotten this burning desire to talk, to confess things to you as a result of reading your book. Really, really funny, but also very, very, very well done. Very well done.
Thank you.